just to make sure that you're getting the best of our content in a timely manner. I've been told the Minister is definitely coming. It's just been slightly delayed, but is now on his way. So he will definitely be on this stage. He's definitely keen for your questions as well. The only thing between us right now is traffic. And I think we've all been there as well. But luckily, you can relax, because in the meantime, you're in very safe hands, not just with me, but also we have a treat in store in the form of a possible future with an interactive demonstration. Now, anybody who saw Kate Darling earlier will have seen her with this incredible looking robot on her lap. Well, if you want to know exactly what it does, then guess what? You're in the right place. So please help me welcome the quite brilliant Kate Darling, research scientist from MIT Media Lab from the USA. Come on up, Kate.
Hello again. So if you saw our panel earlier, we were talking a little bit about the risks of AI. But what I want to do now is I want to tell you a little bit about why I personally think that automated technologies like artificial intelligence and especially robotics are so unique and interesting. And I want to try to give you a slightly different way to think about them as we move into the future. So I really love robots. I always have. I love them more than I love lemonade. And I remember when I first got to MIT, I was so excited. This was like 13 years ago. I was so excited that I was going to get to see the cutting edge technology in robotics, the robots that were about to take everyone's jobs. And I quickly discovered that they looked like this. So they weren't quite ready to take everyone's jobs. Now, we've made a lot of progress in robotics since then. This is a video by Boston Dynamics, a company that some of you may be familiar with. They're probably the world leaders in robot locomotion, and this is their former humanoid robot atlas. They're about to come out with a new atlas, but even this was very, very impressive work. So we made a lot of progress in robotics, and then if you haven't been living under a rock for the past 2 years, you may have noticed some progress in artificial intelligence as well, especially even just things changing even just in the past few days. But for me personally, the most interesting thing isn't necessarily the technical developments that we've seen. For me, the really interesting thing is what happens when you take AI and robotics and you put them together with people. Because as people start to encounter these technologies in their daily lives, we see some really interesting reactions. So some of you might remember when Google ousted an engineer a few years ago for claiming that the AI system he was interacting with was sentient. Now I'm going to come back to this later on because I think it's important, but also as people start to encounter robots in public spaces, they have pretty interesting reactions to those as well.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Hello, friend! Oh my god! I love you! Jesus Christ! I love you so much! Oh my god.
So this is really interesting to me. This is another Boston Dynamics robot. This one's called Spot. And I know for a fact that the engineers of this company have worked for literally decades to create a robot that is robust and reliable and safe enough to even put out on a public street. And what they didn't work at all on is anticipating how much people would freak out when they see the robots. But this is my wheelhouse because I have always been interested in how and why people treat automated technology like it's alive, despite all knowledge to the contrary. So I was at this conference a few years ago, and I was getting a lemonade at the bar, and I met this guy. Let's call him Scott, because that was his name. And Scott asked me what I was interested in, and I said, I'm interested in how and why people treat automated technology like it's alive, despite all knowledge to the contrary. And Scott said, I don't buy it. And we discussed this for a really long time. And so Scott's perspective was this. This has to be a generational issue, he said. Of course our generation does this. Of course we're silly. We grew up watching Star Wars, We're going to name the robots R2-D2. We're going to reflexively apologize when we trip over a delivery robot on the sidewalk. But newer generations, once they grow up with this technology everywhere, they'll just treat it like any other device. And we talked for a really long time, and I could not convince him, but I'm going to try to convince you otherwise. Because yes, of course there's a novelty effect to this technology, and of course there's the influence of science fiction and pop culture. But there's also an aspect to how we respond to these systems that goes much deeper than novelty. We have an inherent tendency to anthropomorphize, to project human-like traits, qualities, emotions onto non-humans. We do this all the time, for example, with animals. We love to project emotions that may or may not actually be there. But it's not even just living things. We will create emotional bonds to things that are created in the image of something lifelike. You'll see faces and random objects. Faces is an interesting one because the first thing that an infant learns to recognize is a face. It doesn't even have to be a real face, it can just be a simple black and white image. But it's very ingrained in us to look for ourselves in the world around us. And then another thing that our brains respond really strongly to is movement. So there's research indicating that we're constantly scanning our environments and trying to separate things into objects and agents. And that makes a lot of sense evolutionarily because we've had to watch out for the agents in the past. But what it means now, in a world where we have robots, is that now we live in a world where we have objects that move like agents. And that tricks people's brains into projecting intent onto the movement. You see this happen even with the most simple robots, like the Roomba vacuum cleaner, which is just a disc, it runs around the floor to clean it. But the fact that it's moving around on its own causes people to name their Roomba. Over 85% of Roombas have names. I don't know the statistics for the handheld Dyson vacuum, but they're guaranteed lower. People feel bad for the Roomba when it gets stuck somewhere. The company has all these amazing stories, especially from their early days where they had a really good return policy. People would send in their robot that was broken, and they would turn down the offer of a brand new replacement because they wanted to get the same one back. They would say, no, we want you to fix Muriel's sweep and send her back to us. There's been research on this. For over 15 years now, we've known that this happens. People develop these emotional bonds, even with very simple robots. Like this is a robot that was deployed in the United States military about 15 years ago. It's a bomb disposal unit. Soldiers would become emotionally attached to them. They would give them names. They would give them medals of honor. They would have funerals with gun salutes for them when they got destroyed. And again, this is a very simple looking robot. It just sticks on treads. And that brings me to an element that can enhance this even further, which is design. So this is an earlier version of the Spot robot, the yellow robot we saw earlier. And when Boston Dynamics put this video online in 2015, it ended up getting a lot of attention. And it got attention because first roboticists saw it and they said, oh, that's amazing, it didn't fall over. But then other people started to see the video and they had more negative emotional responses to what was happening. And it got to the point where PETA, the animal rights organization, was getting so many phone calls from journalists that they had to issue a press statement on this. Now, PETA didn't care about this. They said, we're not going to lose any sleep over this because it's not a real dog. But I think this is very interesting. I think it's interesting also because I know the reason that so many companies create this type of technology isn't to get people to treat it like it's alive. It's because it's really practical to borrow from biology when you're trying to make something that can navigate different kinds of terrain. But it's also almost impossible to watch something like this move around and not feel like it has agency. And then there's the field of social robotics that does this intentionally. Social robots are intentionally designed to mimic sounds, cues, movements, behaviors that people automatically, subconsciously associate with states of mind. So I first got interested in this when I bought one of these. This is called a Pleo. It's a toy that came out in 2007. So this is a very old robot. They don't make them anymore. But I brought one with me today. This is Mr. Spaghetti. Let's see if he can perform for us. He's very, very old. But the reason that I bought the Pleo back in the day in 2007 is because it's a really cool robot toy. It has all these motors and touch sensors, it has an infrared camera in the snout, and it mimics lifelike behavior really well. There we go. Hi, Mr. Spaghetti. Now, one of the things that the Pleo has is a tilt sensor. And so when I first bought it, I thought it was super cool, and I was showing it off to all my friends. And I would tell my friends, ooh, hold it up by the tail, see what it does. Because this is what happens when you hold the Pleo up by the tail. So it mimics pain and distress pretty well. And what ended up happening was I had one friend who held it up for a really long time and just kind of watched it struggle. And it started to bother me. And I said, okay, that's enough now, let's put him back down. And then I pet the robot to make it stop crying. And that was a really interesting reaction that I had, because I knew exactly how the robot worked and why it was doing what it was doing, but I still felt compelled to be kind to it and comfort it. And so that sparked a curiosity in me. And I'm actually going to turn Mr. Spaghetti back off because he'll be too distracting otherwise. So that sparked an initial curiosity in this. And so fast forward a few years, and I did a workshop at a conference in Geneva, Switzerland with my friend Hannes Gosselt. And we took 5 of these Pleo robots. We gave them to 5 groups of people. Can I get the slides back? Oh, okay, wait. Here we go. Thank you. So we gave them to 5 groups of people. We had them, the groups named their robot dinosaur and play with it and interact with it. And after about 45 minutes, we unveiled a hammer and a hatchet and a knife. And we started trying to get them to torture the robots. And it turned out to be a lot more dramatic than we thought it was going to be. We assumed it would be a little dramatic, but we thought that there would probably be a split in the room of people. Some people would say, oh sure, of course, it's just a robot, I can't feel anything. And other people might have more problem with what we were asking them to do. And we were gonna ratchet up the violence and see if the split in the room changed. But instead, everyone just completely refused to do it. So at some point we improvised and we said, okay, you can save your team's robot if you hit another team's robot with a hammer. And they tried to do this. I have some footage. It's not very good, there's no sound, but you can totally see what's going on. So this woman has decided this is not her team's robot, she's gonna save her team's robot by hitting this one. And she gave up. So that's how that went. And so finally we threatened to destroy all of the robots unless someone took a hatchet to one of them. And a guy did it. I don't have a video of this, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, but he volunteered. We all stood in a circle and he brought the hatchet down on the robot's neck and everyone kind of winced and looked away. And then there was this half-joking, half-serious moment of silence in the room for the fallen robot. So that was a really, really interesting day, and it was kind of a career-changing moment for me. This was not research, this was a workshop, this was not a controlled setting, there were no scientific conclusions that we could draw from this, but it ended up inspiring some later research that I did at MIT with my colleagues Kalash Nandi and Cynthia Brazil, where we were looking at some of the factors that could have influenced people's reactions. And we used something much more simple than a cute baby dinosaur robot. We used text bugs. We had people smash them with mallets. We were looking at things like, do people hesitate more to harm, quote-unquote harm, something that moves in a lifelike way if you give it a name? Do people hesitate more if they have higher natural tendencies for empathy? And we were able to establish a possible relationship between people's tendencies for empathy and how they're willing to treat a machine, which became part of a already large at the time and growing body of research in human-robot interaction that clearly demonstrates that we respond to the cues that the lifelike machines give us, and we respond even if we know perfectly well that they're not real. So you might remember my lemonade friend, Scott. So when we met at this conference, we met at the beginning of a conference, and we ended up bumping into each other again at the end. And Scott said, "Oh, Kate, I thought of you because I saw a robot demo at this conference." And so the demo he had seen was this dragonfly robot. This is a real dragonfly, not a robot, but you can imagine something very biologically inspired. It had wings, it could fly around. And he said that at some point he noticed the people in the room watching the robot and how transfixed they were. They couldn't take their eyes off of the movement above their heads. And he said, "You know, it made me think, Kate, maybe you're right. Maybe we are built this way. But I still don't buy it." And we shook hands and we parted ways, and as we parted ways, at least he admitted that human-robot interaction is an interesting field of study. So yeah, obviously I think it's an interesting field of study, but I also think it's an important field of study. I think that human-robot interaction is important because what's happening right now all over the world is that we've had these technologies forever. We've had robots in factories building cars, we've had artificial intelligence embedded in our applications, but now these technologies are coming into shared spaces where people are aware that they're interacting with AI, or where they're encountering a robot in a workplace, in a public space, in their homes. And so as we integrate the technology in these shared spaces, it's important to understand that people treat these things differently than other devices. And that can have consequences. For example, if you design a robot that people don't really like the look or the feel of, they hate it way more than a non-robotic device that does the exact same thing. And then on the other hand, there are some effects that companies have started trying to lean into. This is an older video. I don't know if this company still does this, but this is a Japanese manufacturing company called Glory. They make these money handling machines. And they have workers in the factory. They come in the mornings, they warm up their bodies for their day on the assembly line. And what this company will do is they'll have the robots do the exercises with the people in order to be perceived as colleagues instead of machines. Social robotics is a field that is intentionally leaning into our willingness to suspend our disbelief and anthropomorphize and project agency onto robots and even establish emotional connections with robots. And they're trying to harness this tendency for use cases in health and education that are pretty cool. Not to replace teachers or replace humans, but rather to facilitate communication. However, I do think that social robotics comes with some ethical concerns and issues. So coming back to this Google engineer who got sidelined a few years ago, I think that our reaction to this news story was the wrong reaction. Because what happened was, this guy got ridiculed worldwide. He just got completely destroyed in the press. And he got destroyed because, of course, the AI is not sentient, and I don't think the AI is going to be sentient anytime soon. But as people interact more with these lifelike chatbots and robots, this is going to happen much more, not less. And it's something that we need to be prepared for. And it raises some concerns, from the fact that chatbots can give people false or harmful information, to the fact that robots can tell other people your secrets. There are a lot of nefarious ways that the technology could be used not in a user's own best interest, but in someone else's best interest. And then there's another reason that our anthropomorphism of these systems matters. And it's because I believe it's part of a huge problem in how we currently think about and talk about artificial intelligence and robots. If you do a Google image search for the words artificial intelligence, you get a lot of pictures of human brains and humanoid robots, because we are constantly, subconsciously comparing artificial intelligence to human intelligence and robots to people. We do this when we talk about what intelligence even is. We also do this in our conversations around things like robots and job replacement, which is often assumed to be a one-on-one replacement. But it doesn't make any sense, because artificial intelligence, even now, is not like human intelligence. We already have machines that are much smarter than us. They can do endless calculations. They can see patterns in data that we would never see. They can beat us at games like chess and Go. And on the other hand, sometimes they make really strange mistakes. So here the image recognition system thinks this is a loaf of bread because the paws are hidden beneath the body. Now, my point is not that this isn't a solvable problem. This is a very solvable problem. You just throw more data at the system and it will eventually learn that this is a cat. The point that I'm trying to make is that this is not the type of mistake that my 3-year-old would ever make. Or I'll give you a different example. A lot of people are using ChatGPT to write code. One type of code you can write is SVG code. It outputs a very simple image. So if you ask ChatGPT to write some sample SVG code that draws a magical pony, it'll happily say, yes, sure, this code creates a simple illustration of a pink pony, and of course, it looks nothing like a pony. Now again, my point is not that this isn't a solvable problem, this is very solvable. My point is also not that the system isn't smart, it's very smart. My point is that my 3-year-old would never make this kind of mistake. And so to me, the question isn't, can we eventually recreate human intelligence and skill? The question is, why would we even want to do that when we can create something that's different? So I think this human comparison really limits us because that should not be our goal in the first place. But how do we get people to stop doing this, given that we automatically anthropomorphize and that I don't think we can stop people from treating these systems subconsciously like they're alive? Well, one analogy that I like to use that changes the conversation in some ways is the analogy of animals. Throughout history, we've used animals for work, for weaponry, for companionship, and we've partnered with animals not because they do what we do, but because their skill sets are different from ours, and that's incredibly useful. We've used oxen to plow our fields for millennia. We've used horses and camels to travel the earth in new ways and create entire new economies. Here's the original hobby photography drone from the early 1900s. So animals have extended our physical abilities. They've also extended our sensing abilities. Here's the original sensory equipment from the coal mine, the canary. And here's an official United States Navy echolocation device, because in the 60s and 70s, both the US and Soviet navies started marine mammal training programs, because dolphins have amazing echolocation abilities and you can train them to do things. So they trained them to locate lost underwater equipment, to do mine detection. But the point that I want to make is not that robots and animals are the same or that we should be using them for the same things. The point is just that using a different analogy opens people's minds to other ways that we could be using the technology, and it helps challenge this constant assumption that it can, will, or should replace people. This has been a narrative that we've heard over and over again for decades now. No jobs, blame the robots. Well, I think that headline would be a little more accurate if it was no jobs, blame company decision-making against the backdrop of unbridled corporate capitalism, globalization, and a political economy that treats workers like replaceable commodities. So less pithy headline, a little bit more accurate in describing what's going on. We as societies have a lot of choices that we can be making. We could be choosing to invest in technology that helps people do a better job instead of trying to automate them away. But like I mentioned on the panel earlier, we are operating within a political economy that sets very short-term profit incentives and doesn't allow for the creative thinking that needs to go into making the best use of these technologies. I think the best use cases for robotics and artificial intelligence are when they're either helping someone do something better or when they're providing something that we didn't already have previously. I'll give you a very small example from social robotics, which is the field I've done the most work in. This is the Paro baby seal robot. It's a medical device. It's used in nursing homes with dementia patients. And it's just very cute. It's like an animatronic stuffed animal. It makes little movements and sounds. It responds to your touch. And it gives people the sense of nurturing something, which that's a little bit creepy that we're giving people the sense of nurturing something that's not alive. But also they've been able to use it as an effective alternative to medication for calming distressed patients, which is kind of awesome. But whenever I tell people about this robot, oftentimes the first response is, oh my gosh, Kate, that's so terrible. I can't believe we're living in a dystopia where we're giving people robots instead of human care. And I think that's a good reaction because we should always be thinking critically about what we're trying to do with the technology. But that's not actually how this robot is used. What this robot is designed to do is not replace human care, but replace animal therapy. And in contexts where we can't use real animals for reasons of safety or hygiene or cost, but we can use the robots because people will consistently treat the robot more like an animal than a device, which is kind of cool. So coming back to this social emotional connection that we have with robots, if you think about it, throughout history, we've used most animals as tools and products, and some animals have become our companions. Now my prediction for the future is that we're going to do the exact same thing with AI and robotics. Most of these systems will be tools and products, but some of them are actually going to become our companions. Now, we all know what my friend Scott would say to this, but here's what I want to say to Scott. Maybe you're right. Maybe once this technology is everywhere, we'll treat it just like any other device. But I just don't buy it. And if I'm right, then we actually have a lot of work to do to integrate this technology effectively and inclusively. And I truly believe that technology integration in this space requires better understanding our social tendencies, how we anthropomorphize, how we relate to others, how we empathize, how we communicate with others. And I also believe that integrating this technology effectively requires understanding that the true potential of robotics and AI is not to recreate something that we already have. It's for us to partner with these technologies in what we're trying to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. That was a phenomenal speech. Can I get a show of hands from everybody in the audience who might think that they also too one day will develop an emotional human connection with a robot? Everyone in the audience who believes that they may, raise your hands up high so I can see you. Okay, what are we thinking? This is like 20% of the audience, maybe 25%? Anyone that's on the fence? Okay, raise your hand if you think absolutely not. I could never develop an emotional human connection with a robot. Okay, I think that's less than who actually raised their hand, so I'm a little bit confused. But do we have any more questions for Kate here in the audience? Someone that might want to ask a question related to this, then I'll ask Kate to hop back on stage if she's able to answer this question from our.
Oh, I didn't realize.
We'll make it questions. Just one.
Hi Kate, thank you for the lovely chat. Zorabar here again from M37 Labs India. I'll keep it short. Sentient and sentiment are coalesced together, is what I gathered today. And I feel that for robotics to truly percolate down to society, I come from India, so a remote village, right? Like we are 0.1% gathered here on planet right now. I feel that something that is sentient has to be also coalesced with sentiment. Would you agree with that or disagree? And if you do agree, then does that imply that robotics will take all steps forward in humanity, keeping these two together?
That's a great question. I do think that sentience requires not just sentiment, but also embodied intelligence. So it requires a lot of things that humans have that AI currently does not have. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're going to get there. I also don't know if it matters, because I think the more urgent thing that's going to happen is that people will believe that these systems are sentient, or at least behave around them as though they are. And so whether they actually are sentient might not even matter for how we start integrating them into society, and also for some of the ethical issues that we need to consider around them.
Do we have anyone else in the audience?
One more here, just. I wonder if your panel will answer questions, because I have a guy from a company from PIF. He wants to ask you a question. But.
Hello, thanks for the great presentation. My name is Noor Ansari. I am CEO advisor in one of the PIF companies. I work in GovTech and venture building mainly and strategy. Look, it's very interesting to see this emotional connection to robots and AIs, and I'm thinking about it at an international scale and mental health impact. Emotions, if you boil them down, have a linkage with the chemicals in our brains. What is the scale? Do we have any idea about the scale of impact of AI, given this sentiment linked to humans, that could happen in countries, and in what type of countries as well?
Great question. I don't know that I have a sense of the scale, other than that we know that loneliness is a major public health issue worldwide. And we know from research that while robots can never replace anything like human connection, we know that anthropomorphizing things can help people survive. And so I do think there's a lot of potential for robotics to help people and help them in a very public health way if we use them correctly. I think, again, we need to be less focused on replacing things like human connection and more focused on leaning into what robots specifically can do. And so animal-type robots, or robots that are more pet-like, I think are much more effective than trying to create an artificial human companion. But depending on how we do it, I think there's just massive potential to help people.
I want to bounce off what you just said there, Kate, as well, with another wonderful woman here in the audience that has something impactful to say around what it might mean for children.
So hello, my name is Maria Latif bin Khalifa. I graduated from Khalifa University. So I was born in 2002 and I had some impactful touch with technology and some social toys. So for example, I want to become a mother in the future. How can I prevent my child to get a more powerful touch with a doll more than me? Because if they had a doll that would communicate with my child better than me, that would affect their social capabilities, you get me? So how would you prevent that? My child would prefer the doll more than me as a mother in the future.
As a mother, I don't want to believe that anything could ever replace a mother. And we certainly shouldn't be investing in that type of technology. I think one of the things we see in social robotics is that the best use cases for the robots are when, a parent or a caretaker and the child and the robot are all together and doing something together. There's some really amazing research with autistic children and therapy. And the idea is not to just give the child a robot as a replacement for a therapist or a parent or another adult, but rather interact together with the child and use the robot as a facilitator for that communication and that relationship. And so I think if we use the technology correctly, it's going to be a wonderful supplement and not a replacement of your own abilities.
Okay, the last one from a Gen Z, right over here.
Hi Kate, my name is Tanvi and I'm from Safe Technologies. I loved your speech. I was wondering, you mentioned about how AI should take over things that humans can't do. When it comes to automating menial tasks like just proofreading something or redlining a document, what would be your thoughts on AI taking over those tasks?
Great question. So the way that I'm using ChatGPT, for example, in writing isn't to just write an article for me, but rather I find that the technology is really the best if it's helping me when I get stuck. So for example, if I'm looking for a transition sentence between paragraphs, ChatGPT is amazing at helping with that. And there's already some studies showing that it's an amazing productivity enhancer if it's used in connection with a person's existing skills rather than just as a replacement for people. Now, that's not to say that it won't be used as that. Of course, people are going to try to make a quick buck, and if it performs well enough, and then they'll just get rid of a human proofreader and use the AI instead. But I don't think that that's where the real potential is. I think the potential is to use it as a partner.
All right, I have another question over here from this side of the audience. Would you like to stand up? Take a look.
Yeah, hi Kate. I really liked your presentation. It was pretty interesting. Actually, this is a question, but it's actually based on an interesting case. So, my son has been after me Tamagotchi virtual pets kind of thing. And I tell him, why do you need a Tamagotchi virtual pet? You have a dog. You have a real dog. And he's like, no, it's not the same. I told him, what do you mean it's not the same? He's like, first you get so many pets. I'm like, you can't even look after one dog. You want to get so many pets? And he's like, it's easy with virtual pets. You just feed them and do whatever you want, and then they grow, and I get all these different pets. And all my friends have virtual pets. They don't have real animals, they have virtual pets. So it's interesting because you're right. We're creating an interesting scenario or experience with these animals, virtual animals, robotic animals, that are almost becoming a deeper connection than the real thing. By the way, he didn't get the virtual pet. He's supposed to stay with the dog.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I do think he's right in that it's different. I don't think it's better. I think it's just different, and I think we need to be thinking a lot more about what is different about these technologies than a real pet or a human relationship, and leaning into that difference. So it could be that some people can't have a real dog because they can't take care of it, but they might be able to take care of like a Tamagotchi. It's a terrible virtual pet, but it's like from the 80s, 90s, when were Tamagotchis a thing? I can't believe they're back. But so I don't think that they're great replacements, and I think that your son would probably, I doubt that your son is going to grow up and always think that virtual pets are better than real ones. I mean, there are things about real animals that you just can't recreate virtually, including things like when the animal dies, you have to deal with that grief, and you as a family go through the experience of grief together, which is a really important experience for a child that you don't have in the same way with robots or virtual pets. So I don't think that they're the same in many ways, and I don't think that they can or should be a replacement for the real thing.
Thank you very much to Kate Darling, audience, you're amazing. Mr. Spaghetti as well, behaved incredibly well, didn't he? Another round of applause for our amazing research and a brilliant debate. Well done, thank you. Now, it's time for a traffic update. You know on the radio shows where you go to somebody else and they give a traffic update and then it goes back to the main news. So I'd just like you to pretend that I'm somebody else now. It's time for a traffic update. His Excellency is still in the car, but he's getting closer. Okay, thank you very much to our traffic correspondent. Whilst we are resetting the stage for our panel that we're going to do, in the meantime, we're going to do this. We're going to talk about, yes, you've heard this name a few times. Do you know, I remember a few years ago being on stage and talking about this amazing new AI model that was called ChatGPT. And now, all we've heard is DeepSeek. And if you want to know a little bit more about DeepSeek even, try saying that after a very early start. This is our next express panel for you before the Minister comes to answer your questions. It's going to focus mainly on the DeepSeek effect. What happens next? Well, we're about to find out. Let's invite to the stage Ash Puri, partner, Lightrock USA, managing assets of over $5.5 billion, investing in sustainable businesses with unicorns including Neo4j and more, and Anna Gressel, partner, Paul Weiss USA, and co-host of the Waking Up with AI podcast. They're amazing. They came out behind me just so quietly, like a pair of cats. Let's hear what they have to say about the DeepSeek effect.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Anna, let's start with you. So, you have a podcast. You've been working with models for a long, long time. So, how about a quick introduction on what you've been doing up until now?
Thanks, Ash, and thanks everyone for being with us today. So I do have a podcast. I co-host a podcast. It's weekly called Waking Up with AI, and we work. I'm a lawyer, so not a typical person to sit on the stage. But we work with a lot of companies that are really at the edge of AI development. So that's what our podcast focuses on. It's really how to stay up to date on the most cutting edge AI developments every single week. And so we talk a lot about things like DeepSeek, but other advancements. And I think we should talk today about why is this moment such a moment? Why are we sitting here? Why is everyone listening and wanting to know what is actually going on with DeepSeek? But Ash, why don't you introduce yourself as well and talk a little bit about what your investment profile looks like in your own history in AI?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ash. I'm a partner at Lightrock. We're a growth equity fund. So we invest in technology businesses, but I'm very proud to say this because we invest in what is we call sustainable capitalism. So investing in businesses which also have a positive impact, and we try to find businesses where not only they have an attractive financial profile, but also a strong impact profile. And we measure this impact through what we call a framework called people, planet, and productivity. As we talk more about DeepSeek and also about AI, productivity is an important vector besides the financial gains. So when we're looking at investments, we strongly look into this impact case. We're present pretty much globally, and we invest anywhere between $10 to $100 million.
So Ash, why don't we kick it off and talk a little bit about the DeepSeek moment that we're in. I mean, I think if we roll back the clock about a week after the inauguration, DeepSeek was announced on Friday. By Monday, we had seen $1 trillion market loss. Why did that happen? Why are we in this moment? Why are we talking about it? And can you tell us a little bit about DeepSeek, the company, maybe the founder behind the company, and then what was actually so critical about that development that caused such a market shock?
Yeah, I think DeepSeek represents a step function in innovation if you think about the advancement of AI. So, I mean, just to step back, right? I mean, China had these issues with getting access to NVIDIA chips, and when you think about necessity drives innovation, but when there is a shortage of resources, then you become creative. And DeepSeek is an example of that. And if you think back, the challenge with generally AI models is based on probably four aspects. One is the hyperscalers, which providing the bandwidth to get access to the GPUs. Semiconductor companies, which are producing these NVIDIA or companies like that, which are producing the chips. Then you have the software companies, which are leveraging this AI. And then fourth is the power, the electricity companies, which are providing electricity to these hyperscalers. Now, what happened was, for the longest time, we've been believing that you can use large language models by putting lots of GPUs and giving them infinite amount of power to be able to drive very, very complex functions. And being able to drive or find answers to very complex questions because the model just became bigger and bigger and bigger. DeepSeek challenged that premise. It's a 2-year-old project, but if you think about it, they challenged that premise because what they did essentially was take the 60+ billion parameter model and reduce the number of parameters that actually need at any point in time to be able to find the answers to it, which meant they need less memory, they needed less power, but at the same time, they can be a lot more efficient. And this was one of the big reasons why this is such a step function, as I said earlier, in the way how LLMs can work. And if you think about it, if this is all true, then the need for the number of chips that we buy will be a lot lesser. The amount of power that we're going to be using to get answers to our questions, or the inferencing, as we said, AI, will be a lot lesser but more efficient. Or more importantly, I think it will democratize AI. So it's a huge shift which led investors to believe that, wow, this is happening now and happening a lot faster. So what I read somewhere in the Financial Times, what DeepSeek did is what Toyota did to the automotive industry, made it more accessible. So yeah, it's a pretty big moment. But maybe Anna, shifting over to you then. I mean, you spend a lot of time with models, and when you are seeing a lot of these tech companies, models are emerging all the time. So why did it take DeepSeek so much time to make this market impact? Why weren't there no other models before who could do the same? And what do you see as the implications of this?
That's such a good question. I would actually say I think there have been models that have been making similar impacts, but DeepSeek kind of had a moment, and I think the moment is what led to such a market reaction. And I'll just pull on a few threads, and then I can talk about the implications of those. First, we actually had a bunch of news that came out in parallel with the model release, the release of the R1 model, talking about how fast and how inexpensive it was for them to actually train the model. And there was a number out there in the news, $6 million for the last training run. I think there was a real reaction to that. The idea that a major model, a major, very innovative model could be trained for $6 million caused a huge amount of, discourse, pushback, and I think that number has been, in some ways, kind of unpacked a little bit, and I think the number is probably actually higher when you factor in R&D costs, when you factor in kind of all of their investment to get where they were, but still $6 million, or even if it was 10 or 20 for a training run, it's still a relatively lightweight run. The second is actually DeepSeek made certain changes to how they were actually doing the training and the kind of model architecture underneath. First, they used a mixture of experts model, which is how you get to that efficiency that you were talking about before. The model essentially has a bunch of little experts that specialize in answering questions, and it can make the way the model functions more efficient. But they were not the first to do that. ATRC, which is, as many of you know, is based in Abu Dhabi, had a major release of Falcon that was based on a mixture of expert models. That was, I think, 6 months ago. The other thing is the use of reinforcement learning to train the model. That is also kind of a paradigm shift that's happening across the industry. So I don't think, in a way, DeepSeek was alone, but the combination of these factors led to a big media splash and, again, that big market reaction. But I think the more important question is, what does this mean going forward? What lessons can we draw from this? What are we going to look to from a trends perspective? And I just want to point to two. The first is, I do think we're going to continue to see diversification both in model architecture and in chip architecture. And both of those things are driving complexity in the market and a huge innovation space and terrain. And we see things like mixture of expert models, other kinds of model architectures, they're actually kind of more than I can name. We're really beginning to see competition in that space, competition and potentially specialization. And so the question will not just be, is there a transformer model that can do this? But what is the best model for the task? How do we compete on the model architecture? And so I think we're going to see a big kind of competition space there. The second is, of course, the chip architecture. There's so much happening there. Folks have been mentioning Cerebras today, Grok. There are a lot of chip companies in the inference space that are doing really interesting things, and again, kind of driving competition. But I think it's also important to note that this is a moment for open source. And the UAE is leading on open source. There are really amazing things happening with the open sourcing of the Falcon models and, of course, Llama models. And I think this is a testament to how fast companies can move and countries can move when you have open source in the mix. And that's going to be, we could continue talking about it, that's going to be a huge, huge space to play in when it comes to agentic technologies too, which is really what we're looking at when we look at 2025.
Talking about adoption, between November 2022 and I think it was January 2023, over 100 million people were using ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It took Instagram over 2.5 years to get to that number. And when you see DeepSeek, it became the top-ranking app on App Store in a day or two, probably. These announcements on Friday. So that's how quickly we're adopting AI now.
Yeah, it's a massive shift, and that's their their hosted model, that's their app, but also the open source model is available and is being downloaded, used. I mean, some companies are blocking its use, as you guys have heard today, but there's just movement. I mean, the pace of change isn't slowing, it's quickening, and we expect to see that certainly throughout 2025. So I just want to, we're so lucky to have you up here, Ash. I want to talk a little bit about what this looks like for you as a growth stage investor. What are you seeing in terms of, the market impact of this, but particularly for growth stage companies? What does this mean in terms of their ability to compete for investment, their ability to differentiate themselves? What are you seeing?
That's a really interesting question. Let's look at it from the capital markets perspective for 1 second here. So as I mentioned, when it comes to these semiconductor companies, I'm talking about the NVIDIA had over a 13% drop just because of the fact that model makers started to realize you don't need that many chips to do the same thing. And that's interesting because if you're able to drive more efficiency on the existing infrastructure already, that becomes a big, big push. So this is why I'm not saying the number of chips sold will be reduced, but I think the pace at which they'll be deployed will be a lot slower because of the fact that the models probably can become more efficient. The second thing is when it comes to power, I think in 2023, almost 5% of the all US power that was produced was going towards data centers because that's the amount of energy required to run these models. And the thought was we need to produce more power because the data centers are going to consume a lot of energy. They're still going to do that because you're going to have an adoption, a widespread adoption of AI. But the pace at which I think this is going to happen will probably be a little slower than we originally anticipated. But the flip side is, if you think about it, the hyperscalers. The hyperscalers, I mean, just last week, I think it was Meta and Microsoft who released their earnings and was saying they're going to spend billions of dollars on capex infrastructure spend because inferencing is the new word. Everybody wants to have decision making based on AI. But at the same time, if they can reduce the number of chips they need to be able to produce the same kind of results, that means better shareholder value. So you will be able to do more out of the existing infrastructure, and that just increases the return on capital and efficiency, and thus, I guess, better stock prices. Not a stock recommendation, by the way. And at the same time, I think there will be also a massive adoption in just applications adopting AI now. Think about it. All these services that we're so used to using right now, the Expedias of the world, and at the same time, all the data center companies. I'm an investor in a data center business, which will start to have an acceleration in their adoption because of the fact that now you need less compute to be able to do the same results. So all software companies, in my opinion, would have a massive push towards adopting this technology because the bar to adopt this has just suddenly gone lower. So from that perspective, it becomes very interesting. So whilst the infrastructure costs are starting to reduce, you see a lot more software companies leveraging this infrastructure, and it's not going to be reserved for the very big companies only. And I think that's very exciting from an investor perspective because as a growth investor, I'm investing in companies which are young, which are growing pretty quickly, but at the same time, they have to get the bleeding edge of technology. And this is where access to this kind of infrastructure, as you mentioned, this is all open source, being able to adopt some of these models will actually just accelerate the way we deploy this into our day-to-day lives. And I said this, the way SaaS took over software model in a way, now this is the new wave of AI deployments across software.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I were talking about this before the panel, but there's always this debate, I think, in AI, where is the moat? Like, where do you capture the value here, and where can you kind of competitively defend it? And to the extent that there's more competition in the chip space, there's more competition in the model space, I think there's potentially the flip side on the product space, right? And that's where a lot of companies are going to lock in, both innovate, and we're going to see proliferation of companies, but also potentially some lock-in value. You can really identify a great customer base for your product, you can really innovate and kind of find that product market fit, then that's, defensible, using proprietary data, proprietary workflow. So it's quite interesting. I think we're going to see more innovation really kind of downstream in the year ahead.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. I'm watching the clock and I'm realizing some parting thoughts. 25 is start with DeepSeek now. So what do you think? Do you think we'll have more moments like this in the year and in the years to come ahead?
I mean, I think whether we see the same market reaction to this is a little unknown. I mean, that was a huge market response. I don't know that we're going to see that all the time, but I think we are going to see continued releases of products, of models throughout 2025 that feel a little bit like showstopper moments. And the question is, why does that feel like that? And I think it's because we're still at this point of really watching step changes in the technology. The technology is just getting better so fast. And the next batch of that, I think, is going to happen with really advanced agents. We're kind of seeing the beginning of agentic technology, but as that gets much more sophisticated, we're going to have our ChatGPT moment or our DeepSeek moment again and again and again. But I'd also watch, we heard earlier, I'd watch the robotics space. I'd watch the space of on device or kind of edge computing. I think those are places where a step change could lead to, real acceleration in the market in a way that we haven't quite seen so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, one thing DeepSeek has proven is the fact that they can compress these very large models to become more efficient. And so I think what VMware did in a way, they virtualized the Windows onto an Intel chip and you could have multiple sessions of Windows. Similarly, I see that happening a lot more with large language models now, where you could drive more juice out of that GPU because you could be able to compress that model. I think also I see an acceleration of SLMs, the small language models, because more industry specific, sector specific models which can be applied to different areas will also start to blossom because of the fact that now you need less compute to be able to do these specific tasks. And I think that's very exciting from my perspective. And I think that at the same time, spending time, a lot of time in the data center space, I also think now data centers will become more efficient. Data-driven or demand-driven data centers, which are able to increase or decrease their compute requirements based on the market demand of the day, will become a lot more possible. We have an investment in this. It's in what's called the composable infrastructure space. So composability, which is what we've been talking about for the last 4 years, is now starting to happen as a reality, where you see infrastructure being used on demand, it's literally as a service. And that's very exciting because suddenly you can increase the amount of demand you need or reduce it because there's suddenly a football match and the data center had a lot of requirement of bandwidth, for example. So I think DeepSeek has kind of nudged the large infrastructure providers and also large language model providers in the right way, which I think will push innovation a lot more faster now that we've been seeing in the last few years.
I think it's the same point we were talking about earlier, just this differentiation. You can have the largest model, you can put the most compute into it, but you can also have real gains on efficiency in smaller models that are easier to put into devices, they're easier to power robots. But Ash, I just want to get your thoughts on one final point, I think, before we are low on time. What do you think this looks like kind of on a global stage? Is this an accelerator for AI globally, and if so, why?
Totally. I think one of the biggest innovations also with DeepSeek means that every country, I think I heard this in the panel before as well, will start seeing local AI models or LLM models being built for local requirements because every country is different, they have different operating models, and thus localization will become a big factor. At the same time, because every country can have its own infrastructure requirements, data protection requirements, you will start seeing acceleration on that front as well. And at the same time, I think this is the best time in history to be having an AI job, right? So AI jobs will really flourish now, and I can see the requirement for people in this industry to build specific models around that. So I think AI is just going to flourish over the next couple of years, in my opinion.
Well, Ash, I'll say it's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you up here.
Thank you.
We certainly have an exciting year ahead of us.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to Ash and Anna for entertaining and informing us with a fantastic synopsis of DeepSeek. Well, it gives me great pleasure to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, the Minister has made it. Isn't that great news? Yes, thank you very much for staying. And we are incredibly honoured now to introduce him formally, and he's going to be here taking your questions live. This is a unique opportunity to interact one-on-one with someone driving the UAE's AI initiatives, the embodiment of AI everything. I think we can say that, can't we? So please will you join me in welcoming to the stage the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, Digital Economy and Remote Work Applications in the UAE. Well done on getting here, Your Excellency, Omar Sultan Al-Olama. Well, it must be nice sitting in a seat that's not moving.
To say better late than never. I believe that it's better never than late. There's always increased pressure. People have been waiting for you and whether you can add value. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh no, it's an absolute pleasure. And we're going to go to the audience very, very shortly because we've got lots of questions for you. But first, based on the news last week and your own experience, what do you think that the audience should go out and research straight away? What should we be putting into our search engines?
I'm pretty sure everyone's going to talk about DeepSeek. But my genuine view is I think that we're seeing a proliferation right now on multimodal models. And the new models that are, the ones that are able to think critically and dig deeper. I'm really astonished to see what OpenAI was releasing right now with deep research.
Yeah.
So I think the time it takes to launch something that is game-changing has dramatically gotten reduced so far. And I'd actually tell people just keep following the trend and see what's happening.
Yes, because deep research, it's actually actively slowing down the process, so there's more sort of deep research that can be done. So it's fascinating. Well, let's go to questions, shall we? Because you've all been incredibly patient, audience. So, Naeem, I believe you've got a question loaded and ready. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for. So I have Noor Al-Hassani, CEO from Lisan. So he has a question for your residents.
Hello everyone. AI adoption within the government sector is really important in the UAE. So where do you see are the biggest bottleneck within the government sector, and how can the private sector contribute to that?
Thank you.
The bottleneck, are we talking about UAE specifically or governments generally? Both? Okay. So for the UAE specifically, I think this also is relevant for governments around the world. The biggest issue that hinders progress is ignorance. Right? If you don't actually understand how this technology can serve you, what it can do, what it can't do, what the limitations are, you are bound to use it in a way that's going to harm you, or unfortunately not really serve the purpose in which that you are deploying technology. For most governments, the biggest issue is the infrastructure that they have is not AI ready. So they hear about the promise, they get excited about artificial intelligence, but they aren't necessarily ready to actually re-factor it. For the UAE, our issue is twofold. The first is we are constantly pulled between two appealing futures that we want. One is we want to create the future of AI, so we want to build the models, we want to export them. And I think that you will see our efforts with Chase, with Falcon, and with other things as well are moving that direction. But we're also realizing that the economies of scale don't make sense because there will be very few models that dominate. And it does not make sense for us to keep pushing the envelope. So this is, I think, the biggest issue that we have. When do we stop pursuing the next big model and focus really on deployment? And when do we continue to progress on that path? We're always trying to understand what is the right thing to do.